The climate organizations that are currently setting standards for how corporations and governments measure their performance in terms of emissions reduction and the like, these are organizations that have come about, again, as a coalition of the willing. They are private organizations. They're not-for-profits largely. They have been driven by people who are incredibly knowledgeable and passionate about the subject. And they have, over time and through their hard work, been able to see their work become a larger part of the wider global political economy. The first and most important challenge is that there isn't always a clarity of purpose of what is the problem that you are trying to solve here. And this happens, of course, when you start off as a small organization, almost like a mom and pop shop, where you're trying to, and there's very little infrastructure around you. There are very few people who are doing what you're doing, and you have to do a little bit of everything. But now, as the ecosystem has matured and there are more players in the space, it's important that there is an overlap. It's important that the organizations aren't competing with each other in setting standards. It's important that the standards are consistent with each other and the information they generate is comparable across companies. So first and most importantly, there's a question of clarity of mission. How is it that what this particular organization is doing fits in the wider ecosystem and is actually consistent with everything else that's happening? Beyond that, there are concerns around who are the players at the table. For instance, there will be issues about, are we drawing from the same talent pool? Is it all just our friends who get jobs in this space? Again, when this was a smaller, maybe voluntary-led effort, that would have been okay. But as this starts looking and reflecting the force of law, starts being reflected in international treaties, that's no longer acceptable. There needs to be a proper process through which people are hired, people are identified. There needs to be a diversity of experiences represented inside these organizations. Likewise, there needs to be a diversity of various stakeholder groups that advise these organizations. You're going to have to see diverse perspectives, perhaps perspectives from industries that may be even hostile to climate action have to be represented. That's just part of being in a more mature political economy. And the third big area for diversification will come in the funding sources. Currently, these climate organizations are funded by a few generous philanthropists, and they're really just a handful of philanthropists. And again, as this becomes more mainstream, it's important that you have a wider funding pool, but eventually that you have public resources for standard setting. Think of the playbook as a checklist of sorts. What I mean by that is a lot of what's in the playbook is common sense if you're in the business of governance. But it's useful to have a checklist to say, as I go about my day-to-day work, I might sometimes lose perspective of the forest from the trees. And so the checklist allows me to say, okay, am I doing the right thing when it comes to recruiting? Am I doing the right thing when it comes to the way I've designed my advisory boards? Have I created the right checks and balances for the various donors who are involved in supporting my work? Do I have a rigorous due process? Is the due process transparent and predictable for my stakeholders, including for people who are skeptical of what I'm doing? So again, once you look at these things, they should be pretty common sense based. You shouldn't be surprised by anything on the checklist, but having a consolidated checklist is a way to ensure that you're actually doing what is needed in terms of basic hygiene for governance of climate standard setting organizations.